Hello. Today we're going to be talking about economic action and social structure, the problem of embeddedness by Mark Granovetter, and how this piece has been influential in the works of other theorists. But first, to better understand this theory, we are going to go back and answer the question, who is Mark Granovetter? Granovetter is currently a professor of sociology at Stanford University, and according to his profile on their website, his main interest is in the way people, social networks, and social institutions interact and shape one another. This becomes abundantly clear not only in the problem of embeddedness, but also in his other most famous work, The Strength of Weak Ties. Granovetter defines a tie as a combination of the amount of time, the emotional intensity, the intimacy, and the reciprocal services which characterizes the tie. He also talks about triads and states that if A and B are connected, and A and C are connected, B and C will also be connected, which is particularly true in the case of strong ties. Granovetter also argues that some ties can act as a bridge. However, this is not true in the case of strong ties because they would be redundant. He therefore argues that in the case for diffusion, weak ties are the most valuable. So now that we know a little bit more about Granovetter, it's time to talk about the 80s. This is because the problem of embeddedness was written in 1985. In the early 80s, there was a deep economic recession, but by 1983, things were on the upswing. This is because President Reagan implemented supply-side economics, which was a type of neoclassical economics. In his piece, Granovetter specifically argues against the neoclassical mindset, stating that classical and neoclassical economic operates in contrast with an atomized, under-socialized conception of human action continuing in the utilitarian tradition. This basically just means that neoclassical economics don't take into account the role socialization plays in economics. However, this piece does more than just argue against neoclassical economics. This theory states that you cannot separate economics and social relations. These social relations are embedded in economic ones, hence the title. It also helps to explain why people do not always act in the most rational way as economics assumes they do. However, the idea of generalized morality, also brought up in the piece, is not the answer. What really explains this is trust. We are more likely to trust ourselves and our perceptions of people. In this case, we are also more likely to trust people we know. Therefore, it is more likely that we will enter into economic relationships with people we have social relationships with. This theory of embeddedness has been deeply influential on subsequent economic and social pieces. However, we are only going to be talking about 3 cases that specifically cite Granovetter's thinking. Our first one is an integrative model of organizational trust by Roger C. Mayer, James H. Davis, and David F. Schurman. This piece tries to come up with a standard definition of trust. The authors state that the purpose of this article is to illuminate and resolve the problems in the presentation of a model of trust of one individual for another. Through this model, we propose that this level of trust and the level of perceived risk in the situation will lead to risk-taking in the relationship. So how does Granovetter fit in? The authors start by examining where the idea for trust came from. They cite Granovetter's article as the reason why trust became important in business relationships. In coming up with a definition of trust, they define characteristics of the truster and the trustee. One characteristic of the truster is the propensity to trust. They state that this comes from a stable within-party factor that will affect the likelihood the party will trust. And what is an example of a stable within-party factor, you ask? Well, Granovetter says that people are more likely to trust those who they have worked with before because one trusts what one's own information best. It is richer, more detailed, and known to be accurate. This article ultimately ends with 6 different propositions for understanding trust, but acknowledges that there are many limitations to this and that further research should be developed to better understand this phenomenon. The next piece that we'll be talking about is Toward a Theory of Stakeholder Identification and Salience, Defining the Principle of Who and What Really Counts by Ronald K. Mitchell, Bradley R. Agel, and Donna J. Wood. This paper contributes to the theorization of stakeholder theory based on management and environment. But first, to understand everything, let's talk about stakeholder theory. What is it? So Edward Freeman's stakeholder theory holds that a company's stakeholders include just about anyone affected by the company and its workings. So think employees, shareholders, customers, and even the environment. However, this builds on Milton Friedman's theory that states, in capitalism, the only stakeholders a company should care about are its shareholders, and thus its bottom line. The line of thought in this piece is matched by Granovetter's line of thought on hierarchies in his piece. Granovetter states that the organizational form observed in any situation is that which deals most efficiently with the cost of economic transactions. Those that are uncertain in outcome recur frequently and require substantial transaction-specific investments, for example, money, time, or energy that cannot be easily transferred to interaction with others on different matters, are more likely to take place within hierarchically organized firms. This follows along with the idea of Freeman's stakeholder theory, which takes into account more than just money-based transactions, and is also the theory that the authors in this piece argue for. The authors of Toward a Theory of Stakeholder Identification and Salience conclude that managers are the ones who choose who to give the attention to and therefore make stakeholders legitimate. However, the characteristics of a manager play a part in this. They state, another value theorists suggest as important in this relationship is management's sense of self-interest or self-sacrifice. Although some theorists have suggested that all behavior ultimately is self-interested, several social scientists have questioned the common assumptions of self-interest and have suggested that people often act in ways that benefit others, even to their own detriment. This is a direct citation of Granovetter's idea that sometimes economic actors will do things that are not in their best interest because they trust the other economic actor due to personal relations. Granovetter states, the embeddedness argument stresses instead the role of concrete personal relations and structures of such relations in generating trust and discouraging malfeasance. So in this case, the managers are the ones who have personal relations with the stakeholders. The last piece we're going to talk about that builds off Granovetter's theory of embeddedness is Affecting Cognition-Based Trust as Foundations for Interpersonal Cooperation in Organizations by Daniel J. McAllister. This work addresses the following for managers and professionals in organizations: the nature and functioning of relationships of interpersonal trust, what influences trust development, and the implications of trust on behavior and performance. It relies heavily on cognitive and effect-based trust, which I will now define for you. Cognitive-based trust is defined as individuals' beliefs about reliability, dependability, and competence. So think you looking up to your boss. And affective-based trust is described as having mutual interpersonal care and concern or emotional bonds. So think you and a friend. Because he did an actual study to accompany his research, McAllister uses Granovetter's work to come up with different hypotheses for the study. According to him, organizations abound with relationships based on dependability and faith, in which moderate expressions of interpersonal care and concern are not uncommon. Based on this quote, citing Granovetter directly, he forms his first hypothesis. Relationships of interpersonal trust among managers and organizations are characterized by two dimensions: cognition-based trust and effect-based trust. Again, he directly cites Granovetter by saying, because working relationships are typically personal and extend over time, it is possible for people to consider the track record of peers or how they have carried out role-related duties in the past when assessing trustworthiness. This leads him to his second hypothesis. The level of a manager's cognition-based trust in a peer will positively be associated with the extent of that peer's reliable role performance. Now, what is the study, you ask? Well, McAllister describes it as a sample of 194 managers and professionals, including men and women from various industries, reporting on cross-functional dyadic relationships with peers at work. Individuals enrolled in and alumni of the Executive Masters of Business Administration program of a major university in Southern California were requested to participate and to nominate peers from work to participate with them. In examining relationships among middle and upper-level managers, he focused on relations of lateral interdependence, where the impact of trust's presence or absence was expected to be pronounced. He did this by having respondents provide two forms of data: information concerning one triad member from the perspective of a focal manager, and information concerning the second triad member from the perspective of a peer. In examining his data, he found that the results showed strong support for the distinction between cognition-based and effect-based trust predicted in Hypothesis 1, which was based off Granovetter's thinking. Unfortunately, though, he didn't find support for the second hypothesis, which was also based on Granovetter's thinking. He does conclude that interpersonal conduct is important in understanding working relationships, and I think Granovetter would agree. By examining these three works, we can see how Granovetter's theory of embeddedness in economic relations has and continues to influence economic and social theories. Thank you so much, and I hope you learned something.